Welcome. This webinar, Key Considerations in Developing LGBT-Friendly Service Enriched Affordable Housing, is brought to you by SAGE. SAGE, or Services and Advocacy for LGBT Elders, is the country's largest and oldest organization dedicated to improving the lives of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender older adults. Our mission is to lead in addressing issues related to lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender aging. SAGE is headquartered in New York City and offers services throughout the New York City area. However, SAGE also has a national presence with its National Resource Center on LGBT aging, the first in the nation. Additionally, SAGE has 29 affiliates in 21 states across the country. Some of the most identified challenges for our LGBT aging older adult population revolve around their housing settings. Issues pertaining to economic security, housing discrimination, and feeling safe and protected in their home environments often face our LGBT brothers and sisters as they age. The SAGE National LGBT Elder Housing Initiative asks communities to imagine a new reality. The initiative is a multi-year project with 5 key actions designed to ensure millions of LGBT older people can access welcoming LGBT housing in all its forms. The keys to the initiative include building housing. SAGE will invest in building model LGBT elder housing in select communities while sharing our model nationwide to create more LGBT elder housing in new communities. 2 developments are currently underway in New York City. Changing policy. SAGE is actively working to change public policy to both the federal and state level in support of LGBT inclusive housing. Educating consumers. SAGE equips LGBT older adults with tools and resources they need to advocate for LGBT-friendly housing. This includes the searchable map located on SAGE's website at www.sageusa.com/LGBT housing. Expanding services. SAGE will promote best practices in services and programs that support LGBT older people with their housing challenges. And last, training providers. SAGE will be training housing providers nationwide on cultural competency and needs of LGBT older adults. This training is developed and delivered through the SAGE Care training team. Now let's focus on today's presentation objectives. Objectives for today's webinar include to better understand the demographics and magnitude of the issues facing our LGBT elders. It also is focused to provide a basic overview of the housing development process and key considerations an LGBT service provider should take into consideration when engaging in discussions around developing LGBT-friendly affordable housing. To begin, let's talk through the issue at hand to better understand the demographics of our population. Estimates presently range between 2.5 and 3 million LGBT older adults over the age of 50 years old in our country. With the rapidly growing demographics of the baby boomer generation, this number could reach as many as 7 million LGBT older adults by the year 2040 in the United States of America. Presently, in addition, today 1/3 of households 50 and older pay more than 1/3 of their monthly income for rent or mortgage. By 2024, it is estimated that 4.7 million low-income households 50 and older will have annual incomes of less than $30,000. Cost-burdened households are at risk of not paying for needed medications, transportation, and food. In 2014, the Equal Rights Center conducted a report on housing needs of LGBT older adults. They found that 48% of older same-sex couples within the study applying for senior housing were subjected to some form of discrimination. While the impact of housing discrimination within the LGBT community has been discussed anecdotally for some time, this report by the Equal Rights Center in 2014 was the first documented research to confirm these assumptions. The study found that 48% of older same-sex couples applying for senior housing experience some form of housing discrimination. LGBT populations are not presently protected by the Fair Housing Act of 1968, nor the American Civil Rights Act of 1964, and in many cases do not have the same familial supports as their straight counterparts. Often, the LGBT community, especially lesbians, experience lower levels of income due to historic inequities of pay in the workplace. Therefore, it's time to look at a potential solution. In 2015, SAGE launched its National Housing Initiative. This initiative is comprised of a continuum of housing interventions for LGBT older adults. Whether it is providing cultural competency training to maintain affordable housing providers increased education around the needs of LGBT older adults, or creating specific LGBT-friendly affordable senior developments, or accessing tools to safely age in place and engage additional support through community coordination and care supports. The purpose of the initiative is to create a welcoming environment and provide choice to LGBT older adults to select the option that best fits their individual desires and needs. The type of development discussed in this webinar focuses on service-enriched housing. This development differs from traditional affordable housing. In there is an added service component present that plays a critical role in the tenant's overall housing stability. The services have their own operating budget, separate from the overall operations of the building. Service-enriched housing is similar to permanent supportive housing, yet differs in the level of service intensity provided and offered to its tenants. Ideally, the needs of each tenant is assessed by the service staff, and services are offered in a way that are tailored to either on-site provision or through community linkages to organizations throughout the community to meet the tenant's individual service needs. This webinar has been created for LGBT service providers and constituents interested in affordable LGBT-friendly development. Housing development can be a lengthy and laborious process, in some cases taking several years to bring a project to fruition. However, there is a process that takes place, and this presentation will hopefully break down that process and make it more understandable to those not engaged in housing development as a profession. There is a total of 5 phases of the housing development process. Each has its own set of timelines and deliverables, and each plays a critical and key role in the final product of good, stable, and affordable housing. These 5 phases include concept, feasibility analysis, financing, construction, and lease up and operations. Now we will focus on the first phase of the development process. Phase 1 is the concept phase. The first phase of development, or as it's often referred to as the concept phase, is where the partners come together to discuss and create a shared vision of what the need in their community actually is. How will they fill this need by creating this development? How large would the project need to be to address the need? And who the parties will be, and what is the vision for the overall project? There are several roles within the development team, each playing a critical piece to help make that vision come to life. As you see, the developer themselves have several staff or contracted participants on their portion of the team. Each of these members plays the distinct role in assessing performance of the project, identifying financing, submitting applications for permits, among many other activities. Often, pre-development financing, which will be discussed in more depth later in this presentation, is sought to cover the costs of activities in the concept phase of development, as well as in phase 2 of the feasibility analysis. The important part to remember here is that there are 3 key roles: the developer, the property manager, and the service provider. In some cases, with more experienced developers, the developer may also function as the property manager and possibly as the service provider. However, it is recommended that for organizations just beginning to become involved in affordable housing, that you identify and partner with an experienced developer who is familiar and has a track record of developing affordable, service enriched, or supportive housing. Having partners that are experts in development, property management, and service delivery allows each partner to do what they do well, while allowing their partners to take on areas that they are more experienced. Now, we'll look at phase two, or the feasibility analysis. In the second phase of development, or the feasibility analysis as it is referred, assumptions created through the concept phase will begin to be tested. Market analysis is completed to determine the specific needs of the community. This may include things like focus groups, gathering demographic data, creating architectural renderings, and architectural renderings are used to create a visual model of what the development would look like. It is also used along with pro forma analysis to develop cost assumptions for developing the housing and operating it over time. Here is a breakdown of some of the key deliverables created during the feasibility phase of development. These include a physical analysis or schematics of the proposed development, a financial analysis or a development budget to lay out what the actual true costs of developing the project would be, an operating pro forma, which is a month by month breakdown and projections of what it will cost to operate the building, a preliminary market study developing a key insight into what the current needs of the community are and how the project will meet those needs, an organizational analysis to look at the organizations involved as developer, property manager, and service provider, and where there may be gaps in that team, and site control, identifying a site and looking at how the ownership structure of the development will operate moving forward. Within the physical schematics of each housing development, significant granular detail is paid to things such as zoning, utility access, environmental remediation, among many other things. This is typically the point in the process where it is advised for project sponsors to engage the local neighborhood and community in the process to detail your vision for the project, as well as gain support for the new development and utilize their knowledge of the local community to help inform the market analysis. Providing presentations at neighborhood associations or engaging your local city council staff is very common during this phase. The development and operating budget are critical components in the success of the project. It is not uncommon for development budgets in affordable housing to have as many as 7 layers of financing. Also, typically in affordable housing operating subsidies, such as Section 8 Housing Choice Vouchers, are identified as a needed resource to help the project meet its monthly operating expenses while maintaining deep affordability for its tenants. These activities are extremely important to the long-term success of the project. Costs are typically broken down into 2 categories. Hard costs, which it consists of things like tangible property, land, fixtures, and soft costs, which include things like staffing, services, labor, fees, and permits. Again, the market study plays a role of helping to demonstrate the need for your project in your specific community. It makes the case for why a project should be developed. For LGBT service providers, types of data to gather include demographics of local LGBT populations, demographics on aging, and demographics on affordability and accessibility to services like transportation, grocery, other food sources, retail establishments, and medical and health facilities. In order for an organization to ensure they are partnering with other mission-driven organizations that share the similar value structure, it is good to do an organizational analysis of each partner. Service-enriched housing success is dependent on partners working in tandem and close collaboration. These relationships are especially true between partners playing the roles of property manager and service provider. Here are some key questions that you can ask within your development team to help tease out any similarities and differences in overall mission around participation in the project. The ownership structure and type of site control, as you see here, there are several ways this can be structured, will be determined during the feasibility phase of development. The negotiated arrangement for ownership of the site will help determine a great deal for the future course of the development. For instance, as an example, if partners enter into a long-term ground lease for a project, they will never own the building itself. In this instance, it provides partners from incurring the same levels of responsibility as the owner, but they also don't retain the overall real estate asset if it appreciates in value over time. The next phase we will be covering is Phase 3, Financing. This phase relates to the financial resources needed to build, operate, and provide services for the building. You will utilize the development and operating budgets that you created in Phase 2 of the Feasibility Analysis to help inform this process. When thinking of the financial foundation of service-enriched housing, it's important to consider an example of the three-legged stool, with each type of financing being a critical component in keeping the stool upright or the building maintained and operating and being financially solvent. Again, the three legs of the stool include the development financing, the property management or operating financing, and services financing. Development financing is funding utilized to build the project. Operating financing includes subsidies to help cover the costs of operating the building and keeping the rents low to make sure lower income residents can afford to live in the building. Services financing are monies utilized to assist in providing targeted services to tenants living in the building. Within financing, there are several types of financing utilized in the creation of affordable housing, and each comes into play at different points in the process. Pre-development financing, which tends to have lower interest rates, is utilized during the concept and feasibility phases of development when architectural renderings are created and the development team is conducting its due diligence to ensure that a development is viable. If the development does not move forward, this money is lost. Hence the reason the interest rates are lower and is in some cases have clauses that make these types of loans forgivable because the financing carries greater risk and needs to be more flexible. Equity is the predominant source of funding that is used in development. The greatest source of equity in affordable housing development is low-income housing tax credits, which oftentimes will produce anywhere between 40 to 60% of the total equity in developing a project. The stipulations on this money require that the owner-developer keep stringent tax records over a 15-year period of the development. Construction loans are temporary loans that are often used to help build the building itself, but are usually then paid back upon closing and rolled into what is called permanent loans, which are more traditional lending products that stay with the property over the life of the development and paid back over a longer period of time. Operating financing are the monies used to cover the costs of operating the building on a monthly basis. This covers costs such as maintenance, rents, property management, and upkeep. Typically, there is also a requirement for a capital or operating reserve to be in place. These monies are held aside as savings to be used in the case of an emergency, loss of operating subsidies, or if major items need repair in the building, such as a roof, boiler, etc. The source of the reserve is typically drawn down out of the developer's fee, But operating subsidies are typically identified through government programs that help make the units more affordable and allow the project sponsor to rent to lower income populations that cannot afford the market rents needed to run the property. Services financing are the monies identified to provide ongoing services to tenants on an annual basis within the building. Services financing can be provided through philanthropic grants, but also through other government sources like HUD on-site service coordinators and the 202 program, or through local area agencies on aging. In recent years, new programs like Money Follows the Person, or MFP, have been created to help special needs populations move out of institutional settings and into community. Within programs such as these, monies include a case management component. Also, local or state governments, in some instances, have created flexible funding programs to assist in service provision to vulnerable populations. You should check with your local area agency on aging to inquire about programs in your region. The last source of services funding is the Medicaid program, which can offer some limited costs like targeted case management, but is determined at the state level, and not all states have the same level of flexibility. So, checking with your local area agency on aging for potential services financing sources would be most recommended. The fourth phase is the construction phase. This is when the project actually comes to fruition. Some of the pieces needed for construction, such as architectural renderings, will be completed during pre-development. The timeline for construction may differ, but 12 to 18 months is not unreasonable depending on the size and scope of your project. Once financing is complete, the developer and project manager will work with the architect to bid out the project to various contractors. After a contractor is selected, sometimes this can take multiple bids, permits are applied for to your local government, and once granted, construction can begin. During construction, the property management partner and service provider will be actively working to ensure that details are developed on how to manage the building on a daily basis, and provision of services for tenants will meet their intended needs. This work can begin as early as the financing stage, with a recommendation for property management and service providers to meet regularly to develop a strong working relationship. This could be as often as once a week or possibly once a month, depending on the level of work needed to be completed and the level of familiarity the property management staff and services staff may already have with one another. The affirmative marketing plan is the document created to ensure that all fair housing guidelines are met. This needs to be completed prior to doing any tenant outreach. Typically, documents must be filed with your local HUD Office of Fair Housing. Various documents created will include the asset management plan, supportive services plan, your house rules, tenant rights documents, that include the process for which tenants can dispute any decisions made by the property management or service provider. The last phase of development, or phase 5, is lease up and operations. The lease up and operations phase is the final phase of the development process and concludes with tenants living in the building. The property manager and service provider will almost exclusively be responsible for this phase in the development process. As stated previously, work around deliverables such as the supportive service plan, tenant house rules should begin as early as during the financing phase of development, but will definitely be underway during the construction phase. Here you will find a list of some of the key deliverables that should be completed during the lease up and operations phase. The majority of the deliverables in this phase will be completed by the property management and service provider. These include marketing plans, lease agreements, your supportive service plans, and ongoing communication plan between the property management and service provider. In the lease up phase, final budget should be approved by governing entities for both the property manager and service provider. Service providers will need to ensure the levels of service they are offering match up with the needs of the tenants moving into the building. If the service provider does not have the capacity to provide the level of service needed for potential residents, discussions should occur around how to link tenants to these increased levels of service, either by providing on site programming space for partnering agencies who can come in and provide those services on site, or through a memorandum of understanding to link other service partners to your development where tenants can go to receive the needed services to maintain their housing stability. Currently, LGBT populations are not covered under the Fair Housing Law of 1968 nor the Civil Rights Act of 1964. However, there is continuous work on the part of SAGE and others to ensure that fair housing protections as well as employment protections be extended to everyone in the LGBT community. Therefore, it is important to ensure that your development is not LGBT only or LGBT specific. The point is to create an inclusive community where all cultures are embraced, not an exclusive one pertaining to LGBT only population. We want to create welcoming communities where all cultures are celebrated. The difference of an LGBT friendly development is staff that are LGBT culturally competent and services that are LGBT centric have a focus. Those that are LGBT are welcomed and their life experiences embraced and honored. This will create opportunities for those who do not feel comfortable living in this type of inclusive environment to self-select other housing alternatives and opt out. Affirmative marketing should include the following. It should indicate what specific efforts the grantee is making to attract racially, ethnically, and other diverse groups or communities who might not normally seek housing assistance. It should also have an affirmative marketing plan that does not limit the choices. Choices are expanded to include those that might not otherwise be considered because of past discrimination. Here you will see a more detailed breakdown of the affirmative marketing plan. At a minimum, a provider should document some of the following. Special outreach activities undertaken to attract groups that are least likely to apply and also to the general public who applies for housing. Groups considered least likely to apply were identified. Race and ethnicity of all persons applying for housing were embraced, and any race or ethnicity or cultural background are encouraged to visit the project in person. A copy of training materials used to train project management staff on federal, state, and local civil rights laws and fair housing laws should also be utilized. Now, let's talk about some key considerations when looking at developing LGBT friendly service enriched housing. As we've mentioned, choosing your partners is of the utmost importance. Housing partners and development partners exist throughout each state, and ensuring you're selecting partners that align with the mission of your organization is key because these relationships are long-term relationships that will evolve over time. Some of the questions that your organization may want to consider prior to engaging in a new relationship with a development, property manager, or service partner include: what are the organization's existing relationships with landlords or housing authorities? What is their experience in working with service providers? Do they have experience in working with our target population? What is their experience in responding to tenant feedback? Do they incorporate feedback loops for their resident councils? Do they have experience in working with a diverse team and honoring diversity and inclusion? Do they have a good reputation in working with experts and in incorporating best practices into the various models that they utilize for service provision? Accurately identifying the needs of your target population is key to making sure that you are providing the necessary services to keep folks housed safely. Utilizing things such as surveys or targeted focus groups and it can really help accommodate key information to meet the needs and to help you scale programming that is appropriate for your organization's capacity while still meeting the needs of your tenants. Property management and service coordination is another key fundamental issue. In service enriched housing, property management and service provision is a team activity. Regular ongoing coordination will ensure smooth working relationships. A third area to focus on is referral and gaps in training. Identifying gaps with your existing staff and providing staff development and training to fill those gaps will be necessary. Ensuring that your property manager has cultural competency around LGBT aging older adults will be another key consideration. A fourth area to consider is around communications and information sharing. Partners should have structured memorandums of agreement or memorandums of understanding to outline specific roles and responsibilities around data sharing and ongoing coordination on behalf of the tenants. A fifth area to focus on is goal setting. Structuring common goals between partners will ensure that the team is unified in its vision for the project. This can often get lost after a project opens, so iterative reflection will be key. A sixth area of focus is data collection and outcomes. A standard assessment tool should be developed and agreed upon by all partners to measure success. This outcomes data will help in reporting to local, state, and federal funders, as well as reporting out success to other community partners. A seventh key consideration is around tenant recourse and protections. Ensuring that tenants have a voice in assisting to inform programming and a form of recourse around any grievances will be key. This could include a resident council or potentially having an organizational ombudsman to help mediate any outstanding issues. In summary, service enriched housing is a multi-phase and lengthy process. Oftentimes, it can take anywhere between 2 and 5 years for a development once funded to lease up and open its doors. Financing for development, operating, and services needs to be structured and coordinated across the partnership team. So, planning and developing good channels for communication are key. Ensuring that your partner organizations have a shared vision will be a key to success, especially for LGBT friendly, older adult, service enriched housing developments. Recognizing that your partner organizations need LGBT cultural competence in order to properly serve your population. Again, ongoing communication will be critical to avoid key challenges. Marketing of an LGBT welcoming development needs additional detail paid to recruitment, tenant selection, and ongoing vacancies. Finally, here at Sage, we would love to hear from you regarding any work you or your communities are doing related to LGBT-friendly housing and any training needs you might have. Sage Care provides cultural competency training to housing providers across the country. Feel free to contact us with any questions regarding the National LGBT Elder Housing Initiative as well as Sage Care Housing Training.